I have no information that supports those tweets, and we have looked carefully inside the FBI.
But I mean, as you know, President Trump did accuse President Obama, literally, of himself wiretapping. I mean, I have all of the tweets here. He says, is it legal for a sitting president to wiretap a race for president prior to the election? Turned down by court earlier, a new low.
I realize there are limitations on what you can communicate in 140 characters through a tweet, and I'm not justifying that. I'm just saying I think we need to get to all the facts before we reach a conclusion.
Do you think he should own it was a mistake?
Your question is based upon what I heard yesterday. That's where you started your question. I can't answer your question because I didn't have one eye on the television set all day yesterday in regard to the Comey investigation, so I can't go into anything about that you're asking me about.
That it was Barack Obama who led that effort to tap his phones at the Trump Tower.
Right. I think there's a lot of imprecision in the language when you look at a tweet. But I think wiretapping probably to Donald Trump meant spying. And I think Donald Trump or the campaign also probably meant Mike Flynn. So I think really we're arguing circles around something that most people are admitting that somebody was spying on the Trump campaign.
Is the president prepared to withdraw that accusation, apologize to the president?
No, we started a hearing. It's still ongoing. There's a lot of things that aren't being covered in this hearing that I think are interesting. You know, since it's ongoing, I'll leave that for now.
I think the president is somewhat indifferent to things that are true or false. He has spent his whole life bullshitting. He has succeeded by bullshitting. He has gotten the presidency by bullshitting. It's very hard to tell somebody at that point that bullshit doesn't work because look at the results, right? But that's what he does. He sees something, he doesn't particularly care if it's true or not, he just puts it out there. Yeah. And then he puts something else out. And notice again what he did at this press conference. When pushed on it, he doesn't take responsibility. I wasn't saying that, I was just quoting somebody else.
Hold Republicans who vote against health care accountable. Are they going to pay a price if they vote against this bill?
I think they'll probably pay a price at home. Meaning I think that you can't go promise over and over again since 2010 in the case that the member's been there that long, but at least for those who've been there that long and at least, and even the new ones, this was a major component of the last election. And I think there was probably not a single Republican member in itself who went out and talked about this. And I think when you realize the components of this bill and that the president worked with the House and the Senate to put something together that achieved a promise that was made to voters, yeah, I think there's going to be a price to be paid, but it's going to be with their own voters. And they're going to have to go back and explain to them why they made a commitment to them and then didn't follow through. And one of the things that's interesting that people who agree or don't agree with the president in terms of his legislative agenda at least give him high marks, regardless of whether or not they subscribe to his agenda, for keeping his word and his promises. And I think that's one of the things that he's made very clear this morning. We pledged to the American people at the congressional level, at the Senate level, at the federal, at the presidential level to go do something. And this bill, while it probably not everybody got everything they wanted, does exactly what we said. It's repealing it and replacing it with all of the principles and the aspects that we discussed throughout not only last cycle, but in a lot of these cases back through 2010.
Sergei Lyshenko is a Ukrainian journalist turned lawmaker who staked his career on fighting corruption. He takes us for a quick drive through Kiev to show us where this man used to work. Paul Manafort, former Trump campaign manager, now under scrutiny.
It used to be office of Paul Manafort.
This, he says, is where a potentially crucial bit of evidence was found, a suspicious invoice that appears to be personally signed by Paul Manafort. Paul Manafort worked in Ukraine for years, mostly advising former President Viktor Yanukovych, a leader backed by Russian President Vladimir Putin, and so deeply unpopular for his rampant corruption that he was chased out of his multi-billion-dollar palace and into exile in Russia. Angry protesters set fire to his party headquarters in 2014, but not before a group of citizens saved some documents inside, including a handwritten list of cash payments that's known in Ukraine as the Black Ledger. Manafort's name is scrawled 22 times for a total of $12.7 million. When the ledger surfaced in the midst of the Trump campaign last year, Manafort told CNN allegations of corruption were, quote, unfounded, silly, and nonsensical. He said, quote, I have never received a single off-the-books cash payment. But Sergei Lyshenko now has this, an invoice that appears to be personally signed by Paul Manafort, stamped with the Ukrainian company registration number. The date, 14th of October 2009, and the amount, $750,000, are an exact match to a Manafort entry on the Black Ledger. CNN has not been able to verify the authenticity of the document. We asked Paul Manafort to verify the document and his signature. His spokesman told us the allegations were, quote, baseless, and sent this response. Paul Manafort does not recognize those documents, and that is not his signature. We compared Lyshenko's scanned signature pages to Department of Justice documents filed and signed by Manafort, now available online.
This is the first time we see Manafort's signature in this Ukrainian side of his story.
The invoice shows 501 units of assorted computer equipment sold by Davis Manafort to a Neocom Systems, a Belize-registered shell company with a bank account listed in Kyrgyzstan. Lyshenko says the document was found last year in a locked safe by a cleaning crew inside the former offices of Davis Manafort.
Looks like Manafort was not only political consultant but also trader of computer processors. I'm sure that it's fake invoice, fake contract, just to artificially establish legal basis for transaction of this huge amount of money.
Do you think this is money laundering?
I believe it has to be investigated, and this issue has to be checked during the investigation. In my journalist experience, it looks like money laundering and wire fraud.
Has the FBI contacted you about this information?
I cannot tell you about this, so let's say this, no comment.
We asked Lyshenko if the FBI now has a copy of this document. He would not comment, but for Lyshenko, the paper trail provides evidence that must be investigated. Atika Schubert, CNN, Kiev.
There's no such thing as a Republican judge or a Democratic judge.
Supreme Court nominee Neil Gorsuch steering clear of politics.
A good judge doesn't give a whit about politics.
Cross-examined by Democrats today, skeptical about his ability to be independent from President Trump.
When I became a judge, they gave me a gavel, not a rubber stamp.
Democrats attempting to pin him down on some of the president's most controversial views.
I will apply the law faithfully and fearlessly and without regard to persons.
Like the president's so-called travel ban, and if he thinks a blanket religious test is consistent with the First Amendment.
A Republican congressman recently said the best thing the president could do for his Muslim ban is to make sure he has Gorsuch on the Supreme Court before the appeals.
Senator, a lot of people say a lot of silly things.
That's more than silly. That's this congressman wants you on the court so they can uphold a Muslim ban.
Senator, he has no idea how I'd rule in that case.
On Trump's promise as a candidate to appoint anti-abortion justices who would overturn Roe v. Wade.
Do you view Roe as having super precedent?
It has been reaffirmed many times. I can say that, yes.
Yes, dozens.
Gorsuch saying he has not revealed his intentions to the president.
In that interview, did he ever ask you to overrule Roe v. Wade?
No, Senator.
What would he have done if he'd asked?
Senator, I would have walked out the door. It's not what judges do.
Gorsuch also showing distance from the president on the reinstatement of torture.
We have a convention against torture and implementing legislation which ban torture.
Does the president have the right to authorize torture if it violates the laws that have been passed by Congress?
Senator, no man is above the law.
Meantime, Democrats are seizing on some new allegations about Gorsuch.
No, Senator, and I'd be delighted to actually clear this up.
A former law student of his writing this letter to the Senate Judiciary, claiming Gorsuch suggested in class that women use companies for maternity benefits, then leave after the baby is born.
I do ask for a show of hands. How many of you have had questions like this asked of you in the employment environment? An inappropriate question about your family planning. And I am shocked every year, Senator, how many young women raise their hand.
The president said that he would appoint someone who would overturn Roe. You pointed out to me that you viewed precedent in a serious way in that it added stability to the law. Could you elaborate on the point that you made in my office on that?
Part of the value of precedent, it has lots of value. It has value in and of itself because it's our history. And our history has value intrinsically. But it also has an instrumental value in this sense. It adds to the determinacy of law. We have lots of tools that allow us to narrow the realm of admissible dispute between parties so that people can anticipate and organize their affairs. It's part of the reason why the rule of law in this country works so well. We have statutes, we have rules, we have a fact-finding process and a judicial system that's the envy of the world. And precedent is a key part of that because, as the chairman pointed out when he quoted a piece of mine, once a case is settled, that adds to the determinacy of the law. What was once a hotly contested issue is no longer a hotly contested issue. We move forward. And Senator, the value of that is the United States Supreme Court takes something like 70 or 80 cases a year. That is a tiny fraction of all the disputes in our federal legal system, right?
Right.
My law clerks tell me it's something like 0.001%. And they're unanimous in those cases which have divided circuit judges. That's why Supreme Court largely takes the case, because it's divided us. It's one of the rare cases where we disagree. They're unanimous 40% of the time.
One other question.
Sure.
Do you view Roe as having super precedent?
Well, Senator, a super precedent is
in numbers, 44.
It has been reaffirmed many times. I can say
Yes.
that, yes.
Do you agree with me that there should not be a religious test in the United States?
I need to know more specifics.
Well, let me give you an example. Should there be a religious test to serve in the military?
Oh, Senator, that would be inappropriate, yes. That's against the law. That's against the law.
Or well, of course, we go right back to the question, do we ban people based solely on the religion? Solely on their religion.
Senator, we have the religious...
Not on whether they form a threat or something, but you ban somebody solely on their religion.
Senator, we have not just the First Amendment free exercise clause in this country. Very important protection. We have not just the equal protection guarantee of the 14th Amendment, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, gender, ethnicity. We also have the Religious Freedom Restoration Act that Senator Hatch mentioned, which was a bipartisan bill passed by this body with support of Senator Kennedy and Senator Schumer when he was in the House. And that imposes an even higher standard on the government than the First Amendment when it comes to religious discrimination. It says that if there's any sincerely held religious belief, earnestly held religious belief, the government must meet strict scrutiny before it may regulate on that basis. Strict scrutiny being the highest standard known in American law.
Well, the reason I ask these questions, there is a legitimate concern.